Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maharis Narani, and I am the Digital Communications Specialist here at the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. Welcome to our next session in the Black History Month Speaker Series. We are so excited to collaborate with the Faculty of Arts and Humanities to welcome Andrea Thompson to Western. Before we begin with introductions, I would like to make you aware of some resources available to attendees. The closed captions have been enabled. You can access the captions by hitting the CC button in your control bar. The function has been disabled for the event. If you have a question, please submit it to the Q&A tab in your control options, and we will review them at the end. We will begin with a land acknowledgement offered by Miriam O.
We acknowledge that Western University is located on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, the Napawa, and Chonota nations on lands connected with the London Township and Somber Treaties of 1796 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum. With this, we respect the long-standing relationships that Indigenous nations have to this land as they are the original caretakers. We acknowledge historical and ongoing injustices that Indigenous peoples endure in Canada and accept responsibility as a public institution to contribute toward revealing and correcting miseducation, as well as renewing respect for relationships with Indigenous communities through our teaching, research, and community service. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. Now we welcome Matthew Dawkins from the Faculty of Arts and Humanities to introduce our special guest speaker.
Hi, everyone. Really quickly, before I start my introduction, I just like to quickly say that I am studying abroad right now. So if I do sound a little muffled, or perhaps if I disconnect, I like to just extend my apologies. But it means a lot to me to be giving this introduction. I really wanted to be here in general. So I do apologize if anything interrupts my introduction. But with that being said, let's begin. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matthew Dawkins, and I'm a third-year student at Western, double majoring in English literature and SASA. And I'm also a marketing and communications assistant at the Faculty of Arts and Humanities. On behalf of the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion and the Faculty of Arts and Humanities, I would like to introduce our third speaker as part of Black History Month Speaker Series at Western University, Andrea Thompson. This is her first presentation to the Western community, and today she will share with us her talk titled The Oceanic Art of Spoken Word, Influences of Black North American. Andrea Thompson has been publishing and performing her work for over 25 years. In 2005, her spoken word album, One, was nominated for a Canadian Urban Music Award. In 2009, she was the Canadian Festival of Spoken Words Poet of Honor. And in 2019, poetry album, Solarations, helped her for the League of Canadian Poets Sherry D. Wilson Golden Bird Award. She's co-author of the anthology, Other Tongues, Mixed Race Women Speak Out, and author of the novel, Over Our Heads. Thompson currently teaches in the Center for Addiction and Mental Health at the University of Toronto's School of Continuing Studies. She's also a member of the Brick Books Editorial Collective and artistic director of Brick's online spoken word showcase, Brickyard. Thompson's work is featured in the anthology Best Canadian Poetry 2020, and she's the recipient of the 2021 Leon E. and Anne M. Pavlik Poetry Prize. Her poetry collection, A Selected History of Soul Speak, is available to order through the Western Bookstore as part of the Black Excellence Collection. On behalf of Western University and the London community, I welcome you, Andrea.
Thank you so much, Matthew. Wow, what a beautiful introduction. Hello, everybody. My name is Andrea. I'm really happy to be here. I want to start off by thanking everybody who went into organizing this event today. So thank you, Matthew, for that beautiful introduction, and the Western University's Faculty of Arts and Humanities, one of the hosts of today, also Leslie Oliver and Mars Noorani of the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. So yeah, I'm really excited to be here. I'm going to be reading some work from my new collection, Selected History of Soul Speak, and also talking to you about one of the major themes of the collection, which is the influence of Black history and culture on contemporary spoken word. So to do this, I was thinking, I think I'm going to start at the beginning and the end of the book. So I'm going to start with a quote, and this is a quote. It's the inscription in the collection. It's also a quote by Toni Morrison from her Nobel lecture when she won the Nobel Award in 1993, and it goes like this. "We die. That might be the meaning of life, but we do language. That may be the measure of our lives." So I think in this presentation, we're really going to look at that kind of weaving of and influence, cross-pollinating kind of influence of Black history and literary history, really, and contemporary spoken word. So one of the things in this collection, I really had fun with creating a context for it, and a kind of academic context in the form of a lot of notes. There's an epilogue at the back and a mini essay and a lot of footnotes. And one of the things that I mentioned in the essay is that it's unusual to have so many notes, I think, in a poetry collection. But one of the reasons that I felt I needed to do it was because so many of the influences that I mentioned aren't commonly known, even in CanLit, even in the Canadian literary establishment. A lot of influences of Black history and Black literary history are still unsung. So I'm going to read you this epilogue, and I've kind of turned the first section into a poem. And this is a reworking of an excerpt from two versions of an essay that was published in two different books, one that came out already called Writing, Creative Writing, Pedagogy, Research and Practice, and one that is coming up that's I'm really excited about, which is called Harriet's Legacies, Race, Historical Memory and Futures in Canada. That's coming out this year from McGill Queen's University Press. And a lot of what I share today is going to be from that essay that's included in that collection. So here's the epilogue. Once upon, and I should mention too, I start this with this specific phrase because this is also how Toni Morrison started her Nobel lecture, with this phrase, once upon a time. It's these words spoken aloud that often mark our first experience of literature. Through stories, we are initiated into the world of language, infused with imagery and allegory, tradition and history. Oral lore becomes cultural artifact, becomes thread of knowledge passed down, a tapestry woven generation after generation. Once upon a time, each time we hear this familiar refrain, we are taken deeper into the realm of the symbolic, where the act of language meets the evolution of individual and ancestral psyche. During slavery, Black North Americans sang out in rebellion, created a communal language of connection and a way to celebrate dreams of freedom, the wind carrying their voices forward ahead of them. Rhyme, rhythm, and cadence became vehicles of covert insurgence. Spirituals of Canaan, Egypt, and Israel became escape anthems, encoded with tempo-driven direction, when to lay low and when to head north again. We freed ourselves, voice first. Vernacular and metaphor became medium for political action. We shared information, we sang and we made our plans to follow the North Star all the way to the promised land. This is the story of how Black North American spoken word began. So, okay, so that kind of leads us to the first question. I have a series of questions that I'm gonna kind of present and then do my best to answer. And the first one is, what is spoken word? So I've been teaching spoken word for about 25 years, and I started back in the 90s, and in the 90s, I was an arts administrator. I was a very shy, reluctant poet who was basically pushed onto stage and loved the sense of empowerment that I got from that. I was also behind the scenes working at a radio station, a campus radio station at UBC, and became a co-host. And after I got pushed onto stage, I became a member of the first slam poetry team in Canada. And at that time, you know, the idea of what is spoken word, that term didn't even exist. We called it performance poetry. We called it fusion poetry. But radio had a strong influence on it. And radio, if something isn't music, it's called spoken word. So that term kind of stuck and continued on till today. In terms of like, what is it? What is this animal called spoken word? I like to look at it as an umbrella term. And underneath that umbrella, we have things like poetry that's performed out loud for an audience, which is the tradition that I come from, dub poetry, storytelling, which goes back to an indigenous history, jazz poetry, hip hop poetry, hip hop a cappella. That's again under the umbrella to me of spoken word. And one of the things too about spoken word is there's a real musical kind of parallel lineage that you can see. So you have dub poetry, and dub poetry evolved out of Caribbean reggae tradition. Jazz poetry, again, evolved out of this history of jazz. There's even cowboy poetry. So pretty much any kind of music that you can think of, there is a parallel stream of spoken word art as well. The other thing that I always talk about when I'm teaching spoken word is this idea of hybridity. You know, spoken word is a bit of a slippery fish to try to define because it encompasses so many different art forms. When I'm defining it, trying to define it, I always end up kind of doing this little mime in that spoken word is the essence of who you are as an individual put into words and put out into the world. And that who you are is really key because different people are into different things in terms of their creativity. I like to sing, so there's a real musicality influence in my spoken word. I come from a page poem background, so there's that literary influence. Some spoken word though is really influenced by theater, and you know, you can't really tell the difference. Is this a dramatic monologue or is it a spoken word poem? Some people are into stand-up comedy, so is this a stand-up comedy bit or is this a spoken word poem? It becomes very difficult, I think, to create a firm definition between these art forms. So this idea of hybridity, this in embodying different elements, having different influences depending on the practitioner, I think is really key. And one of the things that that happened with this, you know, this teaching it and really focusing on this idea of hybridity was it evolved into teaching it, evolved into a poem about it. And so I think this is the next poem that I want to share with you. And it's kind of a, I guess, a love poem to the art of spoken word and really celebrating that idea of hybridity. It's called Ode to Spoken Word. Oh, you mighty art form, you cross-genre monster of literary hybridity, you enigmatic mammoth, you bombastic behemoth. Roar, you poetic centaur, roar. You guru of fusion, you drop dope patois dub in the middle of a slick hip hop remix, you wild writing werewolf, you howl your truth into silence. You rhyme with the riddling wit of a sphinx, you rap with the rhythm of linguistic gymnastics, you assassin of ignorance, you catalyst of empathetic intelligence. You show us the beauty of a human being in all their glorious, brilliant imperfection. You gorgeous genre-jumping gorgon, you mystical mermaid of metaphor, you shape-shifting, spell-casting storyteller. You magical unicorn of free verse, you conjure connection beyond the fourth wall and teach us strength by being vulnerable. You transformer of language, you alchemist of vernacular cadence, you are a confluence of catharsis, a carnal carnival of goosebumps. You onomatopoeic, snap-happy, postmodern, pun-dropping fountain of figurative images. You lyric-twisting troubadour, you poetically obsessed idealist. Oh, you mercurial angel, you artistic heretic, you literary misfit, you might drop right juicy images into creation, into the garden of our imaginations. You hyperbolic prophet, you poetic Pegasus, you say like scripture, you testify like gospel. You seduce us all with your siren song. You are the personified embodiment of raw, uninhibited inspiration. Your words declare, I am here. You slammed your own brand of performative poetics into existence, reinvented the word and invited the world to hear you preach in the mighty church of verse. You saved language from servitude, from slavery, from imprisonment in the ivory tower of privileged linguistics, and emancipated all of us. You crusader of counterculture, you vehicle for versified resistance, you transmitter of the mythical, you made words dance, igniting a creative renaissance. You wise, sagacious grit, your courage, your fire, revs the engine of our human evolution. Oh, you mighty hybrid art form. You spoke truth to power, encouraged intelligent articulation over violence, resurrected passionate expression, and made poetry fun again. Okay, so that's the first poem. So I want to talk a little bit about this idea of this oceanic art. So the history of spoken word across Turtle Island really is, I think of it as being this ocean of creativity, of orality that is fed by all these different tributaries, all these different cultural streams. Before we had the printing press, before the troubadours of even English literature's oral culture, or even before Odyssey and the Homer, we had oral literature. We had this way of communicating with each other and sharing folklore, sharing cultural values through the gift of orality shared in community. So when we're looking at like the specifics in Canada, you know, I was studying all of these, you know, this idea of these different streams. And for me personally, I realized that the stream that I was really working in as an artist was also the same stream of my ancestral lineage. So this is looking at the stream of influence from slavery up until today. And for myself, my ancestors were in West Virginia, slaves in West Virginia plantation, and escaped and came up through the Underground Railroad. And that's how my ancestors ended up in Canada. So I was thinking about this idea of the orature that kind of resulted of all of these streams coming into spoken word, and how it really departed from traditional colonialist approaches to poetry in Can-Lit. So I wrote this next poem that I'm going to share with you. It's called Canto Unchained. And I have a refrain in it, this poem. And it reminded me, I actually wrote the poem, and somebody said to me, oh, do you know this poem by Muda Baraka? Which I didn't. And so I looked it up. And Muda Baraka is a revolutionary social justice activist and a Jamaican Rastafarian dub poet who wrote this poem called Dis Poem in 1986. And it's a really powerful anti-racism manifesto. I'm going to share a bunch of links, actually. I think I'll do that at the end. And I really encourage you to look it up. It's a beautiful poem. It's a powerful poem. And it really kind of shows that dub flavor coming out of Jamaica of spoken word art. So my kind of interpretation. My version of that is called Canto Unchained, and I'll share that with you now. This poem does not propose prescriptive approaches. It does not investigate tensions or liminal anxieties. This poem has no interest in pedagogical dialectic. It does not gesture towards paradoxical impermeability. This poem has no letters after its name. This poem came here to party. This poem makes no bones about chewing the fat, swallowing the flavors of common vernacular. This poem is bombastic and didactic. This poem has no idea what a populist lexicon is, and this poem doesn't give a darn. This poem has a mind of its own. This poem is a megaphone for vox populi. This poem knows what it's like to not get the joke, to read between the lines of sideways glances, head to toe once-overs, dismissive deductions, the crushing ethnocentric verdict of lack of intellectual worth. This poem never joined a sorority, wasn't hip with the in crowd, knows what it's like to retire to dark corners with a flashlight and notebook. This poem laughs at its own jokes. This poem knows the sting of the whip of language, knows the echoing sound of tin cup against iron bars. This poem is learning to play the harmonica. This poem hates snobby bouncers and invite only. This poem doesn't want to order bottle service. This poem sets the velvet ropes on fire. This poem doesn't think it's a party unless everyone is there. This poem knows how to break dance, knows how to do the hustle and the jitterbug. This poem knows it don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. This poem wants to give you a hug. This poem knows it has to holler to be heard over the din of corporate sponsors. This poem likes to stay up late, sharing the wisdom of elders through the gift of oral culture. This poem knows how to keep ancient traditions warm, using breath to fan the flames of a primordial desire. This poem knows that all we all are is a spark from an inextinguishable fire. This poem is a long-haired draft dodger. This poem is on a mission by any means necessary. This poem could have freed 1,000 slaves from the page if only they had wanted to be free. This poem wants to be the change it wishes to see. This poem has a dream. This poem floats like a butterfly and stings like Allie. This poem always crashes the party. Okay, that's Canto Unchained. So when we're talking about the Black diaspora and the influence on spoken word, after we kind of start in slavery with the slave songs and that covert communication that happened between people, between my ancestors, a lot of Canadians' ancestors, during slavery, where you couldn't, speak out directly and say, hey, Joe, we're escaping, come on down. So there's slave songs, there was code used to communicate, and that kind of the cadence and the musicality of that evolved into a lot of what you see in Black literary products that came out of the Harlem Renaissance. So the Harlem Renaissance in the 20s and the 30s was really a time of flourishing celebration of Black art, Black poetry, Black music, starting in Harlem in New York City and spreading all across North America. So from that stream, and again, we're talking about the stream from slavery down to the Harlem Renaissance, the 20s and the 30s, moving into the Black arts movement in the 60s. And all of this stream really had a profound influence on dub, hip hop, jazz poetry, and definitely spoken word. The thing that, the kind of, let's say the flavor of the art was using art for a vehicle for upliftment. It was both cultural vessel and a vehicle for social justice and equality. And this kind of revolutionary populist, and it was revolutionary really, compared to what was happening in more traditional literary streams. This populist philosophy became an expression of a uniquely Black postmodernism that was very different to, as I said, what was happening in traditional literary history, where it was this idea of we're going to make it new and we're going to overthrow the old vanguard. In Black literary expression, the idea was to celebrate that poetry had been written by Black people throughout history, and to celebrate Black vernacular, to celebrate Black community and the realities that Black people were living in America, in North America, really in general, throughout this time. So this historical development of the Black aesthetic it really encouraged this kind of cross-pollination between this creativity and poetry. And you can see this in the Harlem Renaissance with poets like Langston Hughes, who one of his most famous poems is called The Weary Blues. And this showed the evolution of blues into jazz, kind of like the birth of jazz. And you can see the cadence of that evolution in the poetry of Langston Hughes. So we're moving up now through time from that Harlem Renaissance into the Black arts movement. And this is a movement that was formed by a collection of activists. This is poets like Sonia Sanchez and Mary Baraka. And the Black arts movement was the creative equivalent to the civil rights movement in the 60s. So we've got verse that's used as a tool to express the uniqueness of the Black American experience. And so we're using slang, we're using syntax, and using like the cadence, the way people talk to each other on the streets. This all of a sudden started to show up in poetry, which is like a revolutionary thing. And the goal was really to show the inequities in culture in general and the experiences of Black people. During the Black arts movement, poet, musician Gil Scott-Heron, who cites Langston Hughes as one of his most important influences, not only continued the tradition of this adopting musical rhythms and phrasings into his poetry, but he also helped to contribute to the initiation of the next significant leap in popular Black music, which is rap. Which is commonly known, I think, as in terms of where did the origins of the term, as acronym for rhythm and poetry. So a lot of people have heard of Gil Scott-Heron as from one of his most famous poems / songs. It's really, again, hard to tell what is this poem, is this a song, what's going on here? And I love it that Gil Scott just did his thing. And one of his most favorite pieces was called "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised." And I think that's a phrase that we've heard throughout time and are hearing a lot now. So he was really cited, Gil Scott-Heron, as being the beginning of rap music in North America, or in ever, the beginning of rap music in general. Some people talk about that, maybe it came from the Sugar Hill Gang or even Grandmaster Flash, but Grandmaster Flash himself was talking in interviews about how he was really powerfully influenced by what Gil Scott-Heron was doing with his musicality and bringing this like beat heavy aesthetic into this idea of poetry. And so Gil Scott-Heron actually defined himself a little bit differently. He called himself a bluesologist. And he, because he was such a powerful figure, I wanted to share with you, because of that, I wrote a poem about him called The Stream that really talks about this idea of a cultural stream. And it was influenced by one of the last recordings that he ever did that I saw while doing research for my book. And it's a poem called "I'm New Here," which is the title poem of his last album. He died, I think, in 2019, I believe. So this is one of his last recordings. And it's a beautiful poem. And I thought, I'd really like to share it with you to give you an opportunity to I can contextualize. Oh, look, I'm just looking at the chats here. I can see this poem by Muda Baraka. Thank you, Leslie, that's beautiful. So yeah, I wanted to give you a chance to contextualize and really kind of hear Gil Scott's work yourself. So I'm going to share that piece with you next. And we're screen sharing. Everybody okay? Yes, good. Okay, here we go. I'm new here.
1, 2, 3, 4. I did not become someone different that I did not want to be. But I'm new here. Show me around. No matter how far wrong you've gone, you can always turn around. Met a woman in a bar. Told her I was hard to get to know. About impossible to forget. She said I had an ego on me, the size of Texas. But I'm new here and I forget. Does that mean big or small? No matter how far wrong you've gone, you can always turn around. And I'm shedding plates like a snake. It may be crazy, but I'm the closest thing I have to a voice of reason. Turn around, turn around, turn around. You may come full circle and be new here again. Turn around, turn around, turn around. You may come full circle and be new here again. Turn around, turn around, turn around. You may come full circle and be new here again. Turn around, turn around, turn around. You may come full circle and be new here again. Turn around, turn around, turn around. You may come full circle and be new here again.
Okay, Gil Scott Heron. Wow, I just love that recording. So he was, really important dude in the evolution of spoken word. I've got two poems in here that are dedicated to him. The first one is a mashup that talks about his experience and the kind of the things that he would write about, which is the failure of Black American culture to fulfill the idea of the American dream. And the second one is a response, as I said, to that poem specifically, and it's called The Stream. This is not a poem about Gil Scott Heron. It is not a riff on the death of the American dream. It does not venture a guess as to whether or not the revolution will be aired on television. It is not a poem about hip hop or the starring cast of rap's Black ancestral past. Although this poem will briefly rehash how the lyrical evolution of Grandmaster Flash went supernova in the 70s, ignited by a spark of the combustible verse of Gil Scott, this poem will not focus on how, as time passed, Mr. Heron was reluctantly dubbed the godfather of rap because Gil Scott Heron wouldn't dig that. Gil Scott Heron would want me to tell you the story of how I used the slick urban lure of hip hop to trick a posse of teenage boys into learning the history of Black poetry, how to dig for its roots in the southern soil of slavery, when call and response, rapid fire, verbal assaults, and hypnotic rhythms left the slave masters bewildered by the automatic, fully loaded weapons our ancestors used to fight their way to freedom and back again, to set their brothers and sisters free as well, like the freedom fighter Harriet Tubman. At first, those boys gave me the side eye and said, yo, you be tripping. But when I dropped a dose of Gil Scott Heron, they slowly started to listen. As the story unfolded of how the rebirth of Black urban spoken word was born from a bell-bottomed, afro-headed poetic, how Gil Scott Heron rapped the state of the streets with wild, uninhibited abandon, both outcast and truth teller, troubadour unchained, signifying heir to the literary throne the Black arts movement kept warm. Yeah, word. Gil Scott would want me to talk about the way the verse of Langston Hughes blazed into his ears and ignited a fire, how the embers of Black vernacular forged by the roaring passion of Harlem kept his own heart, his own wily words warm. Gil Scott would want me to relate the history of the linguistically nimble lineage of lyricists from which he was born. Gil Scott would want me to tell you the history of how he and the other far up, can you dig it, hip hep cat griots of his generation, those who revolutionized, regenerated, and reconstructed Black poetics, were only boats floating down the river of diasporic creative evolution, showing us how to let go to the rhythm of the current. Gil Scott would want you to know it ain't about the boat. It's all about the ocean, all about going with the flow and surrender to the moment. Gil Scott would also want me to tell you the rest of the story, how those trick teenage poets opened me up, pushed me past my practiced artist panic, taught me how to freestyle, how to rap badly and be proud, how to not be afraid, to be a fool, to let down the guard of my own barricaded, polished facade as I fumbled to find rhyme in the cycle of after-school ciphers, how those kids gave me space to stumble and fall with the faith that I'd find my rhythm if I let go of my inhibitions and just refuse to give in. But this isn't a poem about me or even intergenerational mentorship. It's a poem about the river of history. It's a poem about the flow that feeds into this oceanic art we call spoken word. It's a poem about the current, about the past, the present, and the precedent. It's about the power of connection between those who laid the tracks and the train that blazes ahead of them. It's about having the courage it takes to dare heart-centered communication, to dare to speak up, to dare to pour out emotion, to dare to bear witness to your life, owning both your courage and the so-called failures that you learn from. It's about daring to dive into the deep seventh chakra blues of the experience of being human and letting it stream through you until you are free and washed clean again. It's about climbing up to the top and diving down to the bottom. It's about letting the words comfort zone become nothing but a joke. Because all your heartbreak and loss, all your wisdom and love, everything that breathes life into your body from the mystery of your soul fills up your lungs and is sent out into the world like a helium balloon suddenly let go. It's a poem about riding the rapids of dialect. It's about being up the creek of your own vulnerability, rudderless and stripped. It's a poem about being naked in a snowstorm and singing out your own name again and again, again and again. It's a poem about knowing you're not alone. You are not alone. You're not alone. You're not alone. As you carve a new language with the tip of your tongue. Yeah, I guess. Maybe this is just another poem about Gil Scott Heron. Just another poem about the life of a riverman with an ego the size of Texas. Or so I've been told. But what do I know? I'm new here with my luggage full of bones. Show me around. Okay. That was my ode to Gil Scott Heron. All right, so in spite of this profound influence that Black poets have had, oops, I just lost my, there we go. Black poets have had on the evolution of both spoken word and the literary arts in general. They've been historically underrepresented in the elite circle of celebrated poetic artists. So remember Sonia Sanchez, I mentioned Sonia Sanchez in terms of the Black art movement. So Sanchez was, as well as being a founding key figure in the movement, who used, like many of the artists, vernacular as a tool for both education and empowerment. Sanchez is also credited for starting the first Black studies courses in I believe in the world, definitely in North America. So, and at the time, there really weren't any courses that celebrated specific cultural groups. So her advocacy work led to the beginning of Asian studies courses, of women's studies courses, gender studies courses. None of this would have existed if it wasn't for Sonia Sanchez kind of knocking on these doors of academia and advocating that this is an important part, should be an important part of post-secondary curriculum. So I was studying Sonia Sanchez and her work and was really blown away by it. And in doing that, I came across this essay by a scholar named Joyce Ann Joyce, who wrote something that really struck me and inspired me to write a poem dedicated to Sonia Sanchez. And so what Joyce Ann Joyce wrote was, African-American writers and poets, so just such as Sonia Sanchez, remain on the margins of American intellectual history. Nothing testifies to this fact more than Harold Bloom's 1998 edition of the best American poetry. This volume contains 33 white men, 18 white women, 3 Black men, and 1 Black woman. And even more disturbing is the fact that Sonia Sanchez is glaringly omitted from the important Norton Anthology of Literature by Women, the 1984 edition. So this inspired me to write this poem for Sonia Sanchez. It's called To White Anthology Editors. And I based this poem on the style and the formatting of one of Sanchez's famous poems called To Black Record Buyers. And in that, it was really a call to the Black community at the time to start supporting Black artists and Black musicians. At the time, there was a real problem with the work of Black artists being co-opted by white artists, and the Black artists not really seeing much of anything of the profits of it. It's funny, I was watching Dreamgirls the other day, and that's a great movie. And that was something that was brought up in that, and it really connected to the urgency why Sonia Sanchez felt the need to write this poem to the Black community. And after reading that essay, I felt the urgency to write this poem for Sonia Sanchez to white anthology editors. Bloom and Norton, don't collect me no scribbling by Black women. They ain't right about nothing. Don't tell me about your crab bucket philosophy, her 40 years of sound and fury signifying can't see the forest, monkey, gibberish. Blues, jazz, soul poetry grows thick and dark down here in the jungle. Bark like words you can chew through, taste like a noose, unbound, not forgotten. Put down that axe. You ain't got no business messing with these roots and branches, with the apple of our eye. Her seeds, all our new beginning. You dig? Okay, so that's to white anthology editors. So one of the things that is really interesting and really great about being old, I guess, or older, let's say, is you get to see the evolution of an art form. And when I think about spoken word, you know, right now it's so popular, it's kind of like this hip thing, but it definitely wasn't always the case. When I started off as a spoken word artist in the 90s, there was this real pressure to kind of declare an allegiance. Are you a poet who works on the page, aka a real poet, or are you one of these kind of spoken word hooligans? Spoken word was thought of as a real transgressive form of literature, and not just transgressive, but almost like an insult to proper poetry, some kind of like toxin to the can-lit body poetic. An example of this, shortly after their appointment in 2002, the first Canadian Parliamentary Poet Laureate called spoken word in general and slam poetry events in particular abominations, adding that, and this is a quote, "To treat poetry as performance is crude and extremely revolting." This public lambasting of spoken word wasn't just happening in Canada. The then honorary chairman of the Academy of American Poets referred to slams as a kind of karaoke of the written word. And literary critic Harold Bloom, again, Harold Bloom, declared them the death of the art in the spring 2000 issue of the Paris Review. So for me, as a young, well, I guess I wasn't that young, but I'd say emerging artist at the time, it was a real blow, and it was a real blow to my kind of self-esteem and my ability to really stand behind my own voice as an artist. So I wrote a poem. It took me a long time. You know, when somebody says something that's an insult to you and it kind of takes you a long time to come up with a rebuttal, I think that was the case for me with that. And so I did come up with a poem, and I'm kind of playing with this idea of abominations, spoken word artists as abominations. And I called it the abominable snowball of spoken word. And I'm also riffing off a quote by a wonderful, wonderful poet and a very good friend of mine, Adebe Durango Adam. And Adebe said at the launch of Brickyard, which was mentioned in my bio, Brickyard is a spoken word, online YouTube spoken word platform that I work for. And at the launch of that event celebrating Brickyard a couple of years ago, Adebe described spoken word as poetry in the key of urgency. And I thought that was a great description. So this is the abominable snowball of spoken word. In this postmodern literary era, spoken word practitioners are undaunted word warriors, weaponizing vernacular to beat, rap, and slam the elitist agents of erasure. We are poetry in the key of urgency, because this here house is on fire. We don't have the privileged luxury for coy coquettishness as we attempt to reinvent the wheel of oral culture and play poetic tennis with the net down. We don't have time to pussyfoot around. We need words that empower the populace, not another gated community to be excluded from. We don't need to be told that we lack the basic educational prerequisites required to understand this poem. We need words that work, not the tyranny of exclusionary impenetrable verse. We need voice, need words like water, need vernacular like shelter, need dialect like tribe, need idiom like a village, like a kitchen to chat in. We need a language to make love with, need a poetry that will hold us, protect us. We need words that will call us home. Okay, so really, when I think about this kind of colonial approach to poetry and this fracturing around spoken word in the literary community, it reminds me of another essay that I came across, fabulous essay by linguistic anthropologist Laura M. Ahern. And the essay is called Language and Agency. And Ahern offers a provisional definition of agency as the socio-culturally meditated capacity to act, and defines language as social action. Ahern provides an overview of the ways that language is used to either encourage or hinder that capacity. And according to Ahern, over the past few decades, postmodern criticisms within the academy have called into question, this is a quote, have called into question impersonal master narratives that leave no room for tensions, contradictions, or oppositional actions on the part of individuals and or collectives. Or this is what Toni Morrison calls in this, going back again to this wonderful, wonderful address that she gave for her Nobel laureate speech, which is also online. Toni Morrison calls these lethal discourses of exclusion, blocking access to cognition for both the excluder and the excluded. This trend indicates dangerous repercussions, I think, in terms of nurturing the development of Black artists and Black writers in specific, especially spoken word artists within the academy. You know, and this was a criticism that really emerged in the 90s, but still kind of exists today. I did a talk at U of T for a professor there, and he looked up the word griot, which is a West African traditional storyteller, poet, the West African equivalent of what is known as a troubadour. Troubadour, a very commonly known word. And he pulled out these big piles of these huge dictionaries, huge thesauruses to try to find the word griot, couldn't find the word griot in there. And I think that's really indicative of something, which is one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about tying in this connection of this stream of Black literary history, Black cultural history, to what we're doing now in spoken word, and helping to educate people who maybe misunderstand what's happening in spoken word. That this, you know, if somebody's doing call and response in a spoken word poem, that harkens back to slavery, that harkens back to what was happening in the Harlem Renaissance or in the Black arts movement in terms of aesthetic. So really, you know, when I think about our elders, they are our North Star, and they're guiding us towards a promised land of a self-sovereign creative expression. Spoken word is an ever-evolving form. It's a kind of poetry politica, a guerrilla literature, a verbal transmission of culture. It's an organic, breathing, living testament to the enduring resilience of both the Black diaspora and the individual human soul. And it's transferred from performer to audience, word by word. So I'm coming up to the end of the time here. I have a couple of poems I'm going to share. One of them is a video poem, and it's a video poem that's the title of from my book. So I'm going to share that now. I have another poem too that I'd like to share if we have time, but I'm really excited to get into the Q&A and see what it is that you have to say. Any thoughts, feedback? I love it when it's a conversation, so I'm really excited to get to that portion with you. So I'm going to share this last piece, and then we'll move on to that. And thank you for listening. Okay. Sorry, I have to take that down, put that back up, go back to Zoom and share screen. Here we go. And here we go. Seemingly innocent spirituals. To both master and overseer, they were merely words. Simple lyrics, ingenuous hallelujah bells. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. But these words were charms, incantations chanted in secret freedom code, surreptitious melodies sung by restless slaves. Chariot became train, became a rumbling underground, echoing over plantation fields of cotton, tobacco, and cane. Gospels for safety, for shouts, never mind, battle cries would leave a brother dead cold in a heartbeat. Mothers with babies strapped to their bent to near snap back, sung under the unrelenting sun of the old South, and men with bodies were tarred and raw till they were little more than meat and bone, recounted these so-called silly spirituals to both each other and God. God, they asked for strength. Each other, they asked for directions. Where to cross over that river and where to board that subterranean northbound train to freedom. Then came the blues, belting out anguish over injustice after emancipation failed to deliver the promised land. Instead, sending Klansmen who strung up to lifeless one brother after another, as law enforcers turned away and crosses burned till dawn. Dallas blues, Memphis blues, I ain't had nothing but bad news, crazy blues. Unabashed, these words laid claim to the pain of generations. Love was sought, found, and gone, gone, gone. But still our history will not be undone. And so the young entered the guarded gates of academia, living the vision of Booker T. Washington, where scholarly success meant abandoning one's own language, meant adopting the mother tongue of Uncle Tom. Until a hunger for our own vernacular mingled with a passion of romanticism, and a new language was born. On the page, on the stages of smoky coffee houses, deep in the heart of Harlem. In this renaissance, we began to reclaim ourselves, began to own our newly found freedom to simply read and write out loud, to make love and meaning from our suffering, to live out loud, word by word on our own terms. Langston Hughes left a language deep as the Euphrates that flowed into the ocean of Gwendolyn Brooks, bestowing permission for preachment as Amiri Baraka and Sonia Sanchez reloaded the literary canon with unapologetic verse fueled by didacticism. And up here in the true north, Clifton Joseph and Lillian Allen waged a rub-a-dub
revolution. And all across the country, slam and hip hop brought the acronym of rhythm and poetry back to the streets, and ghetto speak became fodder for hype verbal artistry. These are our ancestors of verse. This is our lineage. And still unsung are so many who first spoke the words that birthed the language of soul speak.
Okay, I had to let the Canada Council part play because they gave me a grant to make that. Okay, so that's it for me. Thank you so much. I'm excited to open it up to the Q&A. Mars, do you want to help me?
Yes. Thank you so much, Andrea, for sharing not only your knowledge, your experience, but also your performances. You know, there were so many times during this presentation, and performance more so is what I call it, that, you know, I wanted to just clap and keep clapping. And so I think on behalf of you know, all our attendees, I'm going to give you a marvelous clap for everything that you showed with us today. And we do have some things in the Q&A, as well as I also like asking questions, so maybe I might ask you a couple myself. But to sort of go into the Q&A, I think first and foremost, we have someone talking about how you're sharing warmed their heart. And it was you know, ripping off a Band-Aid that has needed ripping for a long time. And it points to an important sort of question to ask is, for those individuals that practice spoken word art or are aspiring to write their own spoken word art, you know, what advice would you give them to get started? Because I'm sure that some Black spoken word artists face barriers when it comes to performing or getting sort of legitimized at times of being spoken, like even just art in general. So maybe if you could provide some insight into that.
I would love to. I would love to. Thank you for asking. And I'm so excited about that. It's funny because if we have time, I'll share one more poem. And I have a poem about that, and it's a pep talk for myself. So one of the things, you know, when people are starting off as artists, you feel like, and especially artists, you know, writers of color, performers, writers of color, you feel like nobody cares about what you have to say. You know, spoken word is really, really attracts people who are disenfranchised, who feel like our voice doesn't matter, nobody cares about our experience. So you know, I just want to say that that feeling is common. That's how we feel when we start off. I also want to add, and I think this is helpful, when you become more established, you have a brand new fear of people giving you wonderful introductions, and then you feel like you have something to live up to. So I say that just to kind of put it out there that wrestling never goes away. And so it's, I think, just kind of making peace with it, that there's this great book called The War of Art by a guy named Stephen Pressfield. And he talks about how it's like there's this force that wants to silence you. And it can be, you know, other people's voices of criticism playing out in your head. Sometimes it's just what you think they're going to think of what you have to say. It becomes like an internalized voice. It could be, you know, like if you had somebody in your family maybe who wasn't, you know, didn't support you. But there's this force. We can, you know, I think I love about that book, The War of Art, is that it kind of personifies this force that wants to silence you. And so if you think about it, that your job is to overcome that and to defeat it, and that it is your enemy. And it is a war. And also, I talk about, when I'm teaching, I always talk about this kind of pie of human experience, right? Like everybody is within this pie. And when you're an artist, you are expressing your slice of that human pie. And a lot of times I think as artists, we feel like, oh, the world has to kind of indulge me while I do that. But the first thing that I found, because I was a very shy, awkward, I'm still a bit awkward, but super awkward before, like never could speak in front of people. Nobody could have told me I would end up doing this. um, but I had this feeling like, I don't want to bother people with my opinion, but one of the first experiences I had was having people come up to me and say, I feel the same way. You've expressed what goes on inside my heart and my head. And so I really encourage people to, because a lot of times, artists it's easier to be kind of altruistic, approach it altruistically than it is in a way that feels more selfish. So to think about, you are expressing that slice of the pie that is not just yours, but a lot of other people live in there. And a lot of them aren't artists, and a lot of them will never have the courage. They don't have even the motivation to express themselves. It's just not their thing. Maybe they're into something, completely different part of their brain is how they operate. So if you are drawn to the idea of self-expression and creative self-expression, you are doing a service to humanity for a lot of other people. There are a lot of other people. If you write a poem about being discriminated against, you are now speaking for millions of people who need you to share that with the world and to speak up. So it's an act of love, and it's an act of generosity, as well as something for yourself. So I think I could go on and on. Somebody got to get the hook with that question. That's that's something I'm very passionate about.
Oh, and that passion definitely does come out for sure. And we definitely see your passion, as well as your passion for others to succeed as well. I think that that's very important to recognize. And I think there is a demand for you to present that other poem that you were thinking. But just before we do that, we do have one more question.
Awesome.
And that is from your own experience in spoken word. Can you tell us a little bit about the noticeable changes that have taken place in the industry since you started performing?
Oh, huge. Like when I started in spoken word didn't exist. So it was the 90s. Let's rewind back to the mid 90s. And I have an essay. I want to just let people know I have an excerpt of an essay that I wrote that talks a little bit about this history, that's on my website. So you can check that out if you're interested in, because I love writing about the history of spoken word. I've written about that a lot. So yeah, if you want to check that out, I've got a few different essays about it. But okay, so we're back in the mid 90s. I'm like, oh, shy, awkward. No, don't make me go up on stage. Yes, go, push, off I go. Okay, so now I'm involved in, the scene, and I know everyone because it's really small. As I said, it didn't have a name. We were called performance poets. We were poets who were doing something performative. We actually had a meeting with organizers across the country where we talked about, what are we going to call this thing? So it was very kind of, nebulous. And what was really interesting at the time too, like imagine this is before the internet. So cross kind of pollination influence was slow, and it required you going to this other town or an artist from the other town coming to you and then, doing a great performance that all of a sudden, got people excited. So, there were these regional kind of flavors, like Montreal was really kind of cabaret. There was a lot of kind of cabaret music, experimental theater influence in spoken word happening. Toronto was really music based. Dub poetry was big. Lillian Allen winning Juno Awards, big deal with the Revolutionary Tea Party. Where I was at West was people coming off of the page to do spoken word, and as well, some theater, people like Sherry D. Wilson coming out of theater was a big thing. And then, you know, there were organizers, Graham Olds and James McAuliffe, who heard about slam, and we were like, what is this slam thing of which you speak? And started the first slam in Vancouver. We didn't know what it was. And so we just kind of brought our little poems. Then we went to the slam. I was on the first team to go down to the first slam nationals that Canada attended in Portland in '96. That blew me away. I remember I kept thinking, you can do that? You can sing? You can do that? So, you know, it was a real fledgling time of, yeah, you can put a song in spoken word, like seeing what the possibilities were and experimenting with that. And as I said, you know, before the internet, so there's this regionality about it. So what I see now, different slams across the country, youth slams, queer slams. I'm doing some really fun interviews on the Brickyard channel on YouTube, Brickyard channel. Go there, please, and subscribe. And we're just starting to post some new stuff, but we're doing interviews with Toronto Poetry Slam, which is one of the longest running slams in the country, and Hot Damn, it's a queer slam. So there's like a queer dedicated space. There's youth slams. So that happening across the country since the 90s. I'm not good at math, but it seems like that's pretty fast to me. That was huge. And the proliferation of spoken word arts. You know, when I started, okay, here's something else that happened. The League of Canadian Poets, I got fired. I was working there and I got fired for advocating for spoken word artists to be let in. There was a fight on to make that happen. Poets were like, I'm gonna quit the league if you let these people in. So that was a whole thing. And that started a membership stream for spoken word artists. The Canada Council, all the funding bodies, Ontario Arts Council, all the regional municipal arts councils, all of a sudden started to get on board. I don't know about the Toronto Arts Council, maybe, yeah. But started to get on board slowly over time to include spoken word as something that's fundable. So, you know, this didn't exist at all, you know, and I really like this idea of a stream, because as somebody who came in and I'm like, okay, look at all these great things that my generation helped to bring to spoken word, you know, I kind of rode on my high horse on that for a little while. And then I realized, hey, wait a second, there's this whole lineage that, you know, like people like Sonia Sanchez and Gil Scott Heron, who invented this wheel way long before any of me and my friends came along. So yeah, again, get the hook. These are great questions. Mars, please.
Yeah, and they're just as great answers. I think you know, you're providing a lot of insight into not just the history of spoken word art, but also, you know, your experience within it. And maybe I have one more follow-up question to that, and then we'll go through to that very much demanded poet show that you wanted to present. So Ontario's first poet, Larete Randell. I don't want to mispronounce the gentleman's name, but I guess, you know, maybe if you can speak to how something like that has impacted spoken word as an art form and its recognition and its celebration.
Well, yeah, I just got introduced to Randell, I think last year. So a little bit late in the game. Like I said, you know, it's hard to keep track of all of the players. But he is, again, I think like another kind of stop on the train, I guess, of this wave of popularity of spoken word. So him becoming the first poet laureate of Ontario is huge, just because the post didn't exist. And so he's the first. There's also, though, been some really amazing spoken word artists in New Halifax, out of Halifax, who became municipal poet laureates. So those were, I think it was Halifax, and then I think too in Calgary, Nomadic, I believe. anyways, sorry, I'm a little bit rusty on the details here, but there were some municipal um, uh, uh, poet laureates as well. Uh, so, but these are huge, you know, and Randell, as I said, just kind of discovered him, and I was checking him out on Instagram the other day, and he's got like a gazillion followers. And he's putting out, you know, he's sponsored, he's putting out some really, really interesting work. And like I said, sponsored, you know, he's doing some work with Holt Renfrew. And this is a kind of crossover into mainstream culture that is, I think, really refreshing. There's also, you know, somebody like Amanda Gorman. We've got a spoken word artist at the American inauguration. It was huge. Shane Koizen was at the Winter Olympics, or was it the Summer Olympics? Anyways, the Olympics that was in Vancouver. Shane Koizen, another fabulous spoken word artist, Canadian spoken word artist, did an opening ceremony poem. And we remember, because he was from Vancouver, I remember him as like the kid in the corner back in the day, you know, and all of a sudden I'm seeing him on a podium, like da 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 da, being lifted up to do his poem. So it's really amazing, you know, especially when after, you know, you'll understand hearing how the kind of discouragement and disparaging comments spoken word as an art form has gotten historically. I think that like it's just that wave of popularity has made it so it cannot be ignored. You know, a lot of series, you know, poetry series that used to be, you know, more kind of highbrow literary artists are now including spoken word artists as well, because there's a need, there's a demand. The Brickyard series that I'm working for is from Brick Books, and Brick Books is one of the most, I think, because I work for them, the most highly respectable, revered small press poetry presses in the country. And the publisher, Elena Muntz, made it clear to me when I became involved in Brickyard that spoken word is something that she's very passionate about, and that is really important. So I think people are really seeing now that the art is something to be celebrated, and there's different people. One of my former students, oh my gosh, Sabrina Benaim, has like a gazillion million hits on her poem, How Explaining Depression to My Mother. Yeah, what? Really? I remember when she started and she was, you know, like super talented, but kind of shy fledgling spoken word artist. So it's really beautiful to see the art form has exploded. It's taken off. One thing that I'll say about that is that I say to emerging artists, to be careful of the trap of trying to sound like somebody else, you know, because a lot of times people will hear other spoken word artists and think, oh, that's how you do it. I want to be like that person, you know, and I'll hear that sometimes, and it makes me sad, because I'll go back again to the mime that I always do when I'm teaching spoken word. When you are doing, you know, that manifestation of how you are uniquely in the world, how do you speak, what influences make you passionate, that's going to be your best work. That's going to be, you know, that's going to be the thing that reinvents the wheel. A lot of what has become kind of traditional cadence in spoken word is, it, you know, was really kind of came out of slam poetry. So, you know, when I see somebody doing something different, and even if it's clunky at first, when you're kind of reinventing the wheel, it's going to be clunky at first, but they have that dedication to their own unique voice. It makes me really happy, because they're going to be the trailblazers who stand out and who inspire that next generation.
Yeah, and speaking of, you know, the visibility and really amazing spoken word artists that are coming out, you know, I'm so desperate at this point to see the poem that you want to share with us, and I'm sure the audience does as well.
Awesome. Okay. All right, so it's funny because I was thinking, oh, should I do this? Should I not do this? So I kind of have it on deck. And so the video that I showed is not yet. No, stop. Sorry, having some technical. I have to just shut something down here. Stop, 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 stop. How do I stop it? Sorry. Quit. Thank you. All right. Sorry. I don't want to open it with that app because it won't work. Oh, there we go. Okay. So sorry about that. The video poem that I played is from a spoken word album that I did called Soul Orations, and it's a collaboration between me and a fabulous musician named Everin Oz. So I was thinking about sharing this poem, which also has music in the background, and I could just read you the poem and play the music in the background. Is this going to work? Sorry about the slowness, but it's all coming together over here. Okay, here we go. So this is called Free Write Manifesto. And I wrote this because as an established artist, I started to get worried about what people expected from me. And I started to get afraid of, oh, is it any good? Is this going to be good? It's always, as artists, we're like, is this any good? Does anybody, emerging artists, established artists, my mentors, it's just the question never goes away, but it strangled me for a while. And I got really frustrated with myself. And I thought, you know, Andrea, you teach this stuff. You give your students pep talks all the time. So you need to write that pep talk down and turn it into a poem and encourage yourself. So this is what I came up with. It's called Free Write Manifesto. Oh yeah, right. And the other thing about it too, it's the first opening image came from a little cartoon I saw of two cartoon people, one at a desk and one standing behind them with a gun, like a little, you know, stick person gun pointing at their head. And the caption, it's a little bit dark, so please excuse me. I thought it was funny, but the caption said, "This is the writing coach we all really need." And at that time, I was like, yeah, this is that really resonates for me because I need some, you know, no wiggle room. Andrea, sit down and write. So it starts with that image, Free Write Manifesto. Write like there's a gun to your head. Write like your life depends on it. Write like writing is water and you are on fire because you are. Write like standing up for yourself, like having your own back. Write like what you think, what you feel matters because it does. Write like your words can save the world because they can. Write like every poem is a song. You know that song played at just the right time? That song that you swear was written with you in mind? That killing me softly, reading my diary song? Poems are like that. All of them are full of magic, healing, and connection. So write the deliciousness of your slice of the human pie. Write the beauty of your perspective, your view from there where you now are, there from your spot on the crest of this interconnected circumference. Write because we need your voice in the chorus in order to be harmonious. Write because you're a badass. Write because your heart is broken. Write like lightning. Write like revenge. Write for your mother. Write for your daughter. Write for your dearly departed. Write for your ancestors. Write to stop yourself from punching a hole in the wall. Write to stop cutting your arms. Write like a howl into silence. Write like you are your own dear heart, beloved. Write like you are precious because you are. Write like you know you are already whole. Write like writing is water and you are a river. bright like a lighthouse, right like your future self, right like coming home. Okay.
Wow, I think that definitely deserves a huge encore, and I wish that we were able to see you live and do this and give you that appreciation. And so once again, on behalf of the attendees here, I give you the biggest encore I possibly can. I am being cognizant of time, so maybe we have time for one more question. And I think this is an important question to ask is, um, because Western, at Western, how can in general university institutions, honor the contributions of Black spoken word poets, such as Sonia Sanchez that you mentioned, and grow the organism of this living, breathing thing that is spoken word art.
Well, you could get my book. Shameless plug, but it's really what I was writing about. I talk about my journey too, so I think it will be encouraging to people who are writers. But there's a lot of history in there, and I think there's a lot of unsung history there, and it's right there in the bookstore at Western, in that fabulous collection that you have, that Black Excellence collection. So that's one way. Also, a lot of spoken word artists. I would just like Google Black spoken word artists. You'll end up going down a Canadian, and then put the Canadian tab on, or Canadian, add that. You'll end up going down a rabbit hole and finding a lot of them. We have a lot of Black spoken word artists on Brickyard. As I said, it's a kind of new platform, so we're just adding new videos, but we have a pretty extensive archive of audio, and there's some really amazing Black spoken word artists there. Going out, supporting events, buying people's books, buying a lot of spoken word artists are publishing books as well. We're interested in the page and different mediums. Following us on Instagram. I'm Andrea Thompson Poet. Come follow me. Follow your other artists that you've come across on Instagram. Subscribe to their YouTube channel. And in terms of the history, like I said, I have a little bit of an essay on spoken word on my website, so you can check that out for free. I've also got some essays coming up that I think are listed on my website. And these are things, like you can just get them out of the library. You don't have to spend any money. The information is there. If you're interested, I encourage you, because I think it really feeds you as an artist. Doing this research for me was, somebody who was one of my teachers when I went back to get my master's degree said to me, and this is how I discovered Sonia Sanchez. She was like, do you know Sonia Sanchez? I kind of heard the name, but I didn't really know her. And once I did the research and kind of started to look into these people, it really makes you realize you're standing on solid ground in what you're doing. Like, it's not just me and my Yahoo spoken word friends doing this, wacky thing with words. I'm part of a long line, a long tradition of artists, and especially Black North American artists, using the oral tradition as a tool for empowerment and a way to convey cultural history and express what's important to us. I think that hopefully will answer. Yeah.
Beautifully said. And so I once again, on behalf of Western, and the EDI office, as well as our partners Andrea, I just want to thank you for coming here and showing us the oceanic art of spoken word. And I just had Leslie in my ear saying, you will be coming back to campus. It will be a live event, so that others can also feel. One of our commenters in the Q&A said goosebumps, and I was feeling goosebumps
Oh,
throughout this whole presentation. So I guess I just wanted to close up. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
I want to thank you too. I just want to jump in really quickly, like when you asked that last question, I want to thank you, and I want to thank Western and the faculty and the Office of the Equity, because you made this happen and you made this a priority. This whole Black History Month speaker series is something that I want to honor you creating this space, and thank you for it. Honestly, thank you.
No, the pleasure is all ours, and we are grateful. And there are also some other members of the community that we want to thank you for this Black History Month speaker series. And so thank you, Central Communications, Arts and Humanities, and everyone involved, including the attendees, for coming to today's webinar. And a special thank you once again to Andrea for sharing your knowledge and your performance with us today.
Thank you. And thanks for coming, everybody. Thanks for coming out. I hope to get to meet you in person sometime. Thanks, Mars. Thanks, Leslie.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.